4 people died. The print matched that of Glendale arson expert John Leonard Orr. Jurors split 8-4 in favor of the death penalty. Believes Orr set nearly 2,000 fires with the pillow pyro. In the mid-1980s and early 1990s, Los Angeles suffered a series of fires that claimed the lives of 4 people in 1984 and cost the state millions of dollars in damages. Investigators concluded that the arsonist, who was nicknamed the Pillow Pyro, set the fires using incendiary devices that he left inside the stores during the day when they were full of customers and employees. The Pillow Pyro task force was formed, and detectives suspected that the arsonist was possibly one of their own, as the perpetrator displayed a thorough knowledge of arson. By 1991, fingerprint technology had advanced to the point of confirming a positive match, revealing the suspect's identity, which would shock even the most seasoned police investigators. Suspected of involvement in nearly 2,000 fires, the Pillow Pyro became the most prolific arsonist in American criminal history. On October 10, 1984, a large fire broke out at an Olds Home Center hardware store located in a shopping plaza in South Pasadena. When firefighters arrived on the scene, the building was almost completely destroyed, and 4 people had died in the fire. The deceased were Ada Deal, 50, and her grandson, Matthew Troidel, 2, Carolyn Krause, 26, a mother of 2, and Jimmy Satina, a 17-year-old employee. The next day, arson investigators from all over Southern California went to the scene and unanimously concluded that the cause of the fire was attributed to an electrical malfunction, all except John Leonard Orr, who disagreed with that conclusion and expressed his frustration, insisting that the cause had been deliberate and claiming that they were dealing with an arsonist. John Orr was a fire captain and arson investigator for the Glendale Fire Department in Southern California. As a child, he always wanted to join the police force, but he failed the entrance exam and became a career firefighter and arson investigator. He would often arrive at the scene of a fire, stroke his mustache while looking up at the sky, and point to an area, declaring it to be the point of origin. Considered an expert by his colleagues, with an uncanny ability to determine the cause of arson fires, he was more often than not correct about the circumstances under which the fire started and how it spread so quickly. The findings of the hardware store investigation showed that the fire broke out very quickly, less than 5 minutes after it started, and spread throughout the Pasadena hardware store in highly flammable polyurethane products, causing the fire to spread rapidly. More fires followed at an alarming rate, which were soon suspected to be the work of the same individual, primarily because of numerous similarities. The arsonist used incendiary timing devices, which consisted of a lit cigarette igniting 3 matches wrapped in yellow-lined writing paper, which was held in place with a rubber band. These devices were usually deposited in densely packed linen tents and allowed to burn slowly. The subsequent fire would quickly spread through the linen pillowcases, resulting in uncontrollable fires that wreaked havoc. Other smaller fires were started on open grassy hills to draw firefighters away from those ignited in congested areas, which were left unattended. One fire in particular destroyed a piece of television history when a fire started on a Warner Brothers lot, burning the set of the television series, The Waltons. Fire Captain Orr was active on the first investigation team and attended most of these arson investigations. He was able to conclude how and where each had started, and was always available to talk to reporters after a fire broke out, or to reassure the public that his investigation was doing everything possible to catch the culprit. In January 1987, a convention of arson investigators throughout California was held in the city of Fresno. During the meeting, an unusual number of suspicious fires occurred both in and around Fresno and further south in Bakersfield. The first of these incidents started at a Fresno pharmacy when a sleeping bag display was set on fire, while across the street, another fire swept through a fabric store. In nearby Tulare, another pharmacy and a fabric store burned, followed by a fire that broke out in a dried flower display at a Bakersfield craft store. Investigators found the charred remains of what appeared to be a simple incendiary device consisting of a filtered cigarette and matches, all held together with a rubber band, the telltale sign of the arsonist nicknamed the Pillow Pyro for his penchant for setting fires in fabric stores. Captain Marvin Casey of the Bakersfield Fire Department was suspicious that it was the work of one of the experts attending the convention. But, without further evidence, Casey was not able to prove his theory. In March 1989, another meeting of arson experts in Pacific Grove, California, coincided with an outbreak of fires in the towns between the conference site and Glendale. Fire Captain Casey investigated these fires and discovered that the same strange but simple device of cigarettes, matches, and yellow-lined paper had been used to start the fires. However, this time he was able to locate a small additional clue, that of a partial fingerprint. Following his hunch that the arsonist was a fellow arson expert, Casey compared the list of attendees at the previous Fresno conference with the list of attendees at the recently held Pacific Grove conference, and was able to come up with a short list of 10 possible suspects. Among the names on the list was John Leonard Orr. The fingerprints of the people on the list were compared to the fingerprint recovered by Casey from the piece of notebook paper found at one of the arson scenes, and all 10 suspects were cleared. Orr went on to pursue his career and his uncanny ability to discover the cause of accidental and deliberate fires. In an article published in the local newspaper on July 5, 1990, he recounted how he had sacrificed his Independence Day vacation for the 11th year in a row so he could patrol the streets looking for what he described as taunting firecrackers who were skirting the law. "Just drive through the park and listen," he said, stopping while looking out an open window. A Los Angeles Times reporter noted. In the late 1990s and early 1991, another series of fires started in Southern California, this time centered in and around the Los Angeles metropolitan area. In response, a large task force known as the PYRO Task Force was formed to identify and apprehend the arsonist. On March 29, 1991, Tom Campuzano of the Los Angeles Arson Task Force attended a meeting of the Regional Fire Investigation Team, made up of the smaller cities in and around Los Angeles County. There he handed out a brochure describing the modus operandi of alleged serial arsonist, the PYRO. At that same meeting was Scott Baker of the California State Fire Marshal's Office, who briefed Campuzano on the series of arsons investigated by Casey. Campuzano and two of his colleagues met with Casey, who informed them of his belief that the perpetrator was an arson investigator from the Los Angeles area. He provided them with a copy of the fingerprint he had recovered from one of the crime scenes, and Campuzano used enhanced fingerprint technology to locate the suspect. On April 17, 1991, the print matched that of Glendale arson expert John Leonard Orr. Thus, he would now be the focus of an intense investigation. He was placed under investigation for several months, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms placed a tracking device on his car in an attempt to catch him in the act. In May 1991, Orr discovered the tracking device hidden in his vehicle, but was unaware of a second tracking device installed later, in November 1991, inside his municipal vehicle. By December, investigators had accumulated sufficient evidence to warrant his arrest when Orr was present at a suspicious fire. A federal grand jury returned an indictment, and Orr was arrested on December 4, 1991. During the search of his home, investigators found a 350-page manuscript of a novel Orr had written that seemed almost like a confession. He had titled it Points of Origin Playing with Fire, which was the story of an arsonist named Aaron Stiles, who also worked as an arson investigator. One of the fires in Orr's book had taken place at a Kmart, the same place where the PYRO had burned. Stiles' preferred incendiary device consisted of a cigarette and matches held together with rubber bands, exactly like those found in the real California fires. With the point source evidence, although circumstantial, investigators had reason to suspect Orr was responsible. Orr's defense attorneys dismissed as ridiculous the idea of using a work of fiction as evidence, but excerpts from the book were used during the 1992 trial. Of great interest to the prosecution was the author's inclusion of an arson attack on a department store called Cal's, in which 4 people perished, including a grandmother and her 2-year-old grandson. That particular detail in the story reflected an actual 1984 fire at Ol's Home Center in South Pasadena, in which 4 people died, including Ada Deal and her grandson, Matthew Troidel, which had initially been ruled an accident. The defense read a position from his manuscript that read, Aaron wanted the Cal fire to be labeled arson. He loved the inadvertent attention he got from the news coverage, and hated that it was not properly recognized. Orr wrote, the deaths were erased from his mind. It wasn't his fault. Just stupid people acting the way stupid people do. Orr's defense attorneys, Peter Giannini and Edward Rucker, argued that the South Pasadena fire was considered an electrical fire, and blasted Orr's manuscript as pure fiction. Giannini presented the testimony of a UCLA forensic psychiatrist who claimed that Orr was driven to set buildings on fire by a compulsion he was unable to control. His attorney said he had no choice in the matter. More damning evidence was presented from his book. Orr wrote in his manuscript that the fictional grandmother was going to take her young grandson out for mint chocolate chip ice cream after his trip to the hardware store. This detail turned out to be true, and it was known only to the child's grandfather, who was present in the store during the fire and narrowly escaped. It was concluded that Orr must have been very close to the fire to know these details. In his defense, Orr said that he had based the arsons in the novel on actual cases he had investigated, but that it was entirely fictional. The jury disagreed with this defense and found him guilty of murder in connection with the Ole fire. He was also found guilty of committing 20 other crimes, including setting a fire in the College Hills section of Glendale that destroyed 67
John
Leonard Orr was convicted of 3 counts of arson in a 5-count indictment, and the judge in the case sentenced him to 3 consecutive 10-year prison terms, even though on March 24, 1993, he pleaded guilty to 3 other arson charges, including a 1990 fire at a builder's Emporium in North Hollywood, and 2 others near Atascadero in 1989. His guilty plea came pursuant to a plea agreement on an 8-count indictment that would allow him to be paroled from federal prison in 2002. He was also ordered to pay $90,000 in restitution. On June 26, 1998, a California state court jury convicted Orr of 4 counts of first-degree murder in connection with the 1984 hardware store fire with special circumstances in a 25-count indictment. Orr, 49, showed no emotion during the brief hearing and declined to address the court. He was facing the death penalty, but his daughter Lori had testified on behalf of the defense, and it was her testimony that kept him from being sentenced to death. Assistant District Attorney Michael Cabral and Sandra Flannery presented evidence showing that Orr had followed what they described as a distinctive pattern of criminal behavior, in which he set fires during the day in polyfoam materials in the back of Western businesses and used a distinctive delay device. Subsequently, jurors split 8-4 in favor of the death penalty, and state law requires the death penalty recommendation to be unanimous. And the judge on that indictment, Robert J. Perry, said Orr's crimes showed great violence and sophistication, and sentenced him to life plus 20 years in prison without the possibility of parole. As for his 240-page paperback Points of Origin Playing with Fire, it was published on August 1, 2002, while Orr was behind bars. The protagonist of Points of Origin, Aaron Stiles, was a firefighter for whom the fixation of setting fires was more exciting than sex. Joseph Wambaugh wrote a book about the case, Fire Lover, and joked about that. After reading Orr's novel, the PYRO task force investigators concluded that you couldn't find that many boners at the Playboy Mansion on New Year's Eve. Orr had always claimed that the novel was a work of fiction and bore no relation to actual events. In an interview, Orr defended his manuscript and expressly stated, "The Aaron Stiles character was a composite of the arsonists I arrested." With Orr's arrest, arson investigators determined that the number of brush fires in the foothills near Los Angeles had decreased by more than 90%. ATF federal agent Mike Matassa believes Orr set nearly 2,000 fires between 1984 and 1991. In fact, some arson investigators and an FBI criminal profiler have suspected that Orr could possibly be one of the worst American serial arsonists of the 20th century. Orr's daughter Lori spent many years maintaining her father's innocence, but eventually realized his guilt and broke off all contact with him. John Leonard Orr, the Pillow Pyro, is currently serving a life sentence in California State Prison Centinela. At this point, haven't you seen this heroic rescue yet? Fortunately, the vast majority of firefighters leave their lives for the people and are true heroes, so I wouldn't miss the video shown on screen. See you inside.